All right. Well, welcome everyone to our second online town hall this week. We were hoping to do an in-person town hall in Santa Rosa earlier this week, but due to the crazy weather and sandstorm, we didn't want folks going out in the weather, and there was a number of safety emergencies. So we did one of these earlier this week, and I think it's a great way to connect with you all, especially for folks that may not be able to get out for things. So I'm going to go ahead and just kick things off by giving you guys a little bit of a map of how we're going to handle the town hall today. I want this to be as interactive as possible, and so we're going to use the chat of the Zoom to, if you guys have questions, if you have comments, and just because of how the Zoom is configured, I'm not able to see your guys' chat, but the staff is going to send those to me, and I'll answer whatever questions and concerns that you guys would like to bring into this space. So I'm going to go ahead and kick things off and start with just an overview of our congressional office, who I am if you guys don't know me, how our work is organized, and then I'm going to give a little bit of a briefing about what's going on in Congress right now, the state of play, what's been happening with the administration, how Congress and our office has been responding to that, what we think are the concrete actions to help protect our communities, and then we're going to open it up for questions. So let me just start by introducing myself. I'm Congresswoman Melanie Stansbury, and I'm deeply proud to represent New Mexico's 1st Congressional District. Albuquerque is right at the center of our district, and I'm here in Albuquerque at my home here. And I'm a native New Mexican. I was born and raised in New Mexico. I was born in Farmington, grew up in the North Valley and west side of Albuquerque. I grew up in a working family. My mother was a seamstress and an artist, and my sister's dad, who helped raise me, owned a small landscaping business. And so I grew up, like many New Mexicans, working for small family-owned businesses that really struggled to make ends meet. And I started my career working in the sciences, working first as a science educator in middle schools and high schools throughout the state. And then I went back to school to get a sociology degree, and I worked on water rights issues and worked on community water issues for a number of years before I had the opportunity to go to Washington, D.C. in 2010 and work for the Obama administration. And I went there thinking I would stay for 6 months, and I ended up staying for 7 years. So I worked for 4 years in various White House offices, including the Environmental Quality Office. And then I was a nonpartisan federal employee at the Office of Management and Budget, where I handled both earth science programs and tribal affairs issues. And then I moved over to the Senate as a committee staffer, where I worked on water and tribal affairs. And I moved home in 2017 back to Albuquerque, and immediately got asked if I would run for the state house. And I was at the time working as a state water ombudsman through the law school and doing consulting work, and was elected to the state legislature. And that sort of put me on the path of being in public service as an elected official myself. But I tell you all this background because it's really important for me that folks, especially in our communities, know that my work on behalf of our congressional district is deeply rooted in what I call community-based policymaking, and that it's rooted in the values, in the needs, and the desires, and the hopes and dreams of our communities. And I'm here to serve our congressional district, to serve New Mexicans, to fight for the things we care for, and to also help to invest in our communities and tackle some of our biggest challenges. And so I was elected to Congress in 2021 when Congresswoman Deb Haaland became our first cabinet secretary. And I have been serving for the last 3.5 years. And during my time serving as the Congresswoman, I have spent the vast majority of my time traveling the district, hearing from our communities about the priorities that our communities have and where our office can help. And so I want to just give you all a little bit of a background on that. So we organize the work in my office across 3 primary topical buckets, and then more work for specific communities. But the three buckets are really economic opportunity and development, community well-being, and land, water, and climate. And then, of course, good government work that we do on veterans issues, on military issues, and work with our communities, whether they're tribal communities, members of the LGBTQ plus community, working with the Black community. So we work on a whole huge range of issues that come to us from our communities. So in economic development, my office has been heavily focused on really trying to address the economic needs of New Mexicans, whether that's infrastructure, particularly in our rural communities and our tribal communities. So we've helped bring back billions of dollars in infrastructure investments, whether that's roads, water pipelines, internet, broadband. We have a very active youth development program in my office. We have an internship program if you have a young person in your life, or you're a young person yourself, or even mid-career. We do semester-based paid internships in my office, and we do a lot of work around youth civic engagement. And we do a lot of work around growing rural economies. In the second bucket around community well-being, that's where I put all of the things that are important for our communities to thrive. And so we work a lot on housing issues and the homeless challenges that our community faces. Through our community funded projects, we've brought back millions of dollars for homeless shelters, homeless providers, and affordable housing projects. We work a lot on the fentanyl crisis and the opioid crisis. And through that work, we've brought millions back for state and local law enforcement to do drug detention and enforcement, for opioid recovery programs, including we're helping to support the building of a new clinic in the International District right now for behavioral health and opioid recovery. We help to build a veterans respite home. So we do a lot of work around mental health, behavioral health. We're doing a lot of work investing in our schools, and we do a lot of, especially bipartisan work around rural healthcare, because if you're a New Mexican, including myself, it is really hard to get access to healthcare in this state. And so we're doing a lot of work around how to build and rebuild our rural healthcare and our healthcare system overall. So that's our community well-being bucket. And then around land, water, and climate issues, we're sponsoring legislation to help our tribes address their water rights needs and issues. We have several bills that we've been working on with tribes around sacred lands. We do a lot of work with the land grants. We were just up in the East Mountains meeting with the land grants yesterday. We do a lot of work on agriculture, working with our farmers and ranchers. And then, of course, because of my background working in water resources, I work a lot on large scale water conservation and river management and drought issues. So that's kind of the scope of the positive work that we're doing. And I serve in a leadership role on the Committee on Oversight. So this Congress, every Congress, you get reassigned to different committees. I remained on the two committees I was last Congress, which was Oversight and Natural Resources. In the Natural Resources Committee, I'm on a subcommittee that has to do with water and wildlife, as well as our tribal affairs and public lands. And then in Oversight, I am now the highest ranking Democrat overseeing what the administration and House Republicans are calling DOGE, which is what I would call a wolf in sheep's clothing. And I'll talk about that here in a moment. But my life in Washington, D.C. is, going back and forth between Albuquerque and D.C. in our communities, and taking your voices back to D.C. to fight for the things that we need, whether that's funding, legislation. We do a tremendous amount of casework to help towns, tribes, nonprofit organizations, and individuals who are having issues with the federal government. We have I think, one of the best casework teams in the state. And so if you're having any issues with anything from Social Security to disability to, a grant proposal that you put in with the federal government, please contact my office. But I will say that this year has been a radical departure from any past year that I've seen during my many years now of federal service. And I think I can say conclusively that this is the strangest time in my lifetime in federal government operations that I've ever seen. And it began at the beginning of this Congress, with the new Congress and with the new president taking office in January. And it basically hasn't stopped since then. So I'm going to outline a little bit of what's going on with the federal efforts and what jurisdiction tools and ways in which we're fighting back in Congress and things that folks in our community can do to respond, and or if you're being impacted by them, how we can help. So, Donald Trump took office in the middle of January, and within the first 48 hours, he signed over 200 executive actions, and that included repealing a lot of the executive law that the former President Biden had put into place. They also signed an executive order to dismantle programs across our federal government that promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. That executive order also sought to freeze and end programs that address climate change and clean energy. And within a week, the Office of Management and Budget, which I used to work at, issued a memorandum that essentially froze federal funds across the board for countless entities. And it was a very chaotic week. In the first, day of the federal funding freeze, the state of New Mexico was heavily impacted. The Medicaid portal had been shut down. The HUD reimbursement portal had been shut down. And there are still nonprofits and service organizations and universities in New Mexico that have not had their funding restored since then, because the administration is claiming that they fall under these various executive orders. Within days, both the state attorney generals as well as nonprofit organizations filed lawsuits against the federal government for these funding freezes, because that is illegal. And whether or not you agree with the way the administration is trying to restructure programs, they have to do it legally. And the way in which they're operating right now is not legal. And I think if you take anything away from this town hall, I hope that that's the message, is that, there is always places and spaces to do bipartisan work that's good government, that is really about finding efficiency in government, that really is about addressing bad behavior in government, that, shores up contracts and make sure we're not paying for outrageous things. And I know that work very intimately because I've done it for a long time, having worked at OMB and in the Senate and now in my current role. But what they're doing is not that. Even though that's what they're going on TV saying they're doing and using their social media, what they're actually doing is illegally funding programs, stopping the funding for programs. They're illegally dismantling programs that they do not have the authority to do, and they're illegally firing federal employees. They're also illegally accessing federal data sets that they're data mining. And they are also illegally giving themselves contracts along the way. And so all of these activities are part of what myself and my oversight role, and House Democrats in particular, we have a task force that is investigating, doing oversight, collaborating with the court cases, and doing things like this, which is educating the public on what's actually happening. Because at the end of the day, the Republicans control the House, the Senate, and the White House. And so the only guardrails around the activities that the White House are doing with our separation of powers is either Congress or the courts. Well, right now, our colleagues in Congress are not holding the administration accountable for illegal activity. In private, they're calling the White House and calling agencies and saying, we don't support this, what are you doing? But they're not publicly speaking out, and they're not publicly voting against or providing appropriate oversight. And in fact, they're very much enabling these activities. The courts, on the other hand, have become the primary backstop and guardrails on the administration. There are now over 160 court cases pending in federal courts across the country that are challenging these activities that the administration is doing. Not because they're necessarily a bad idea. Some of the things that they have ideas to do might help modernize the federal government or might help address efficiency issues. But what they're doing and how they're going about it don't appear to be that. What they appear to be doing is breaking the law and giving themselves contracts along the way. So the administration, in addition to freezing funds, then began mass layoffs. Many of you may have heard about the fork in the road email. It came directly from Elon Musk. What we understand is Elon Musk, who of course is this billionaire donor of Donald Trump, who gave Donald Trump over $250 million in campaign donations. He bought his way into the Oval Office, has been put in charge with no guardrails over personnel restructuring and changing the way the federal government is configured. And he certainly doesn't have either the congressional authority or the administrative authority to be doing this. And that's why everything is being challenged in the courts. But one of the things that Musk did in the early days is his staff, many of whom are computer engineers, hacked the federal personnel management system and is now bypassing all of the agency personnel processes and sending emails directly to federal employees. So the fork in the road basically offered this deferred resignation that you could stay on the payroll for a certain number of months, and that would essentially be a buyout for your time. A lot of people accepted that offer, and because the courts have ruled that he did not have the authority, it has created a lot of chaos for people who did accept that offer. And for a lot of people who did accept the offer, we lost thousands of talented federal employees, including here in New Mexico. We're aware that dozens of nuclear scientists, engineers, and technical professionals who work at the national labs took that early deferment. And so this is creating challenges across all of our federal agencies. A couple of weeks later, the Trump administration, Musk sent a mass email to 2.5 million federal employees without even notifying the cabinet that he was firing all probationary employees. Now, this was any federal employee who was under a new job for the last year or 2 years, depending on the agency. And I think one of the things that's really important to understand is that you're considered in a probationary period anytime you're in a new job in the federal government, but it doesn't mean that these weren't experts in their field. In many cases, these were like the top scientists. In fact, a number of nuclear scientists from the labs got fired. It was teachers at SIPI here on the west side in Albuquerque who'd been teaching for 30 or 40 years and just had a title change. It was senior officials at the Bureau of Indian Affairs who managed the financial compliance of Indian Affairs programs. It was dam managers across the country at Bureau of Reclamation. It was senior firefighters in the Forest Service. It was just countless people. And here in the Albuquerque VA, we heard at least a half dozen stories of veterans themselves who worked for the VA who came back after the firing because it happened on a Friday afternoon and they were locked out of their email system and they didn't even receive notice that they had been fired. And so they walked back onto the job on Monday to find out that they were fired. That was illegal. Trump, Musk did not have the authority to fire all of those people. Personnel laws do not allow firing without cause. Over 200,000 people were fired across the United States. And last week, 2 federal courts in separate jurisdictions found that those firings violated the law. And the Trump administration essentially has a week to comply to re-offer jobs to everyone that it fired. Now, the problem is they don't want to, right? So compliance with these court orders is one of the big issues that we're trying to figure out how to deal with. In addition to all of that, the administration has also been wholesale shutting down agency agencies themselves and portions of agencies. They started with USAID, then they went to the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, and yesterday there was an executive order issued to shut down the Department of Education. This is illegal. They cannot do this. They do not have the authority to do it. Donald Trump literally knew when he signed that executive order yesterday that it was illegal, because a court had found just a few days ago, when they fired 1,500 Department of Ed employees, that it was illegal. So they are knowingly and willingly defying the law and taking these executive actions and daring someone to hold them accountable, which the courts are. We're winning these cases in the courts. And then I think the final piece I want to address under the rubric of behavior by the administration that's creating chaos, and which many of you probably have concerns about, is data, accessing data. The first data set that we're aware of that they accessed was the Treasury payment system. Millions of Americans, whether it's your, tax refund you get through the IRS, or if you're a federal contractor or you're military or a federal employee, that was data that was inside that system, and accessing that data was not only a violation of privacy, but it was also illegal. And the problem is, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, is enforcement. Many of the laws that they're breaking right now are federal laws, and the normal enforcement of federal law is the federal prosecutor, which is the Department of Justice. And under a quote unquote normal administration, it wouldn't matter. The partisan nature of who is serving wouldn't matter. If someone was breaking federal law, DOJ would hold them accountable. But this is the most partisan DOJ we've ever seen before. And not only are they not pursuing cases against the administration, they're enabling them. And it's very clear that Trump is using DOJ as a tool for grinding his political axe against people he disagrees with and going after people to intimidate them. So part of the problem right now is that accountability in the courts is having to come through lawsuits that are filed by non-federal actors. So states, where the states have standing because there's some harm that has come to the states, tribes, nonprofit organizations that have had their funding withheld, and individuals and the unions that represent federal workers. So that's the ecosystem of individuals who are bringing these court cases. And while I'm on it, I'll answer a question that a lot of people ask is, well, why don't the Democrats, for example, who are serving in the House and the Senate, bring their own lawsuits? And unfortunately, the way Congress works is you have to have the consent of the body to take an official action. So we have to vote on it. And because Democrats are in the minority in both the House and the Senate, we do not have the legal standing to bring lawsuits as a body without the consent of the Republicans. So that's why putting pressure on Republicans is so important right now. One, just so they do the right thing and hold the administration accountable and push back against all the bad stuff happening. And two, because they're allowing an executive branch to take away authority from Congress that in the past, no member of Congress would have been okay with. And you'll hear statements from various members of Congress on the Republican side that indicate that they're concerned about it, but thus far they haven't taken any formal action on it. Several other data sets that we know they've data mined include the Social Security data set. Court ordered yesterday an injunction, a restraining order against the administration from data mining and accessing that data, as well as IRS files. So there's a lot of bad stuff going on. And like I said, meanwhile, we know that they're giving themselves contracts and no one's even trying to hide it. It's like, this is not some secret plot. Like, they've been very clear that part of what they're doing is trying to close down agencies they disagree with their mission. They're firing employees that they disagree with their mission, and they want to replace those programs with technology, AI systems, and other contracts to replace those services. And I think the most visible of those changes came at FAA a couple of weeks ago. Elon Musk canceled Verizon's contract, which was probably also illegal, that ran the air traffic control, and basically gave himself a contract to use his Starlink satellite system. So this is illegal. All this is illegal. If you're listening to this and you're wondering, how on earth can they do this? It's illegal. They cannot. And so this is where we come to what many of you are probably hearing is what is being characterized as a constitutional crisis. And the reality is that all of the norms, all of the laws, all of the normal institutional processes for how we uphold the law and hold people accountable are being challenged by this administration. And not only do they not care, they're openly trying to challenge these legal norms. And many of the people who are serving in the administration right now were authors of Project 2025. They were involved in not only drafting that document, but also the legal arguments that they would make in the courts to try to claim that the president had authority that he didn't. And so they are hoping that these cases will end up in front of the Supreme Court, and that the Supreme Court will find in their favor that they have impoundment authority, which is withholding federal funds. The law is very clear. They do not have that authority, but you'll hear Trump administration officials on the news every day saying, we ran on impoundment. Well, you can run on any illegal thing you want, but that doesn't make it legal. And so they're hoping for these legal challenges to happen. The same with the constitutional separation of powers in defying congressional orders and laws that require agencies to do things, and these same laws around personnel and unions. So that brings us to, what are we doing to fight back? I think I strongly believe in my heart of hearts. I know that there are folks out there who are diehard supporters of the agenda that they're seeing, but I think the vast majority of Americans, and the polling really shows this, did not vote for this. They did not vote for tens of thousands of Americans to lose their jobs. They did not vote for the gutting of critical programs. They did not vote for dismantling, programs that save lives. They didn't vote for that. And so part of the crisis that we're in right now then is how to hold these folks accountable to the American public. And it's not a partisan issue. This is a fundamental, like, good government, democracy, the functioning of programs, and making sure that our republic continues to operate. So we are very hamstrung in Congress right now because the Republicans are not actively using the tools of Congress to hold the Trump administration accountable. They could. They absolutely could. They could use oversight. They could use subpoenas. They could use resolutions to hold the administration accountable. A lot of people are asking about impeachment. All of those are congressional processes that would have to be led by, or at least consented to by, Republicans, because the way in which Congress operates, especially in the House, is whatever party has the largest number of members serving controls the agenda. So in the House, the Republicans have a 3-seat majority right now. And not only is the House controlled by Republicans, it's controlled by Mike Johnson, who is the speaker, who is not only a close ally of Donald Trump, but very much on board with everything that's happening. I can tell you that many, many members of the Republican caucus are deeply unhappy and disturbed by what Trump and Elon Musk are doing, because they have no problem telling me that every day. And in fact, an interesting data point is we're currently trying to get a committee rescheduled next week because one of our colleagues passed away, and Marjorie Taylor Greene is refusing to change the committee time so that we can go to the funeral. And the chair of the committee told me that he wants nothing to do with that subcommittee, and is basically trying to disavow it. So the Republicans themselves do not support what's going on, but they're very frightened of the Trump administration going after them. They're frightened the fact that Elon Musk just gave Donald Trump another $100 million for his campaign coffers, and they're very frightened that Trump will primary them in their next elections. So if you're wondering why Republicans are not speaking out, it's because they're frightened. And I'm not giving that cover or justification, but just so you understand how it is that they can know this is wrong, but not stand up against it. So that's kind of what's happening behind the scenes. So for us, as the minority, as Democrats serving in the minority, we do have some tools. We can use our oversight tools to try to compel evidence to be produced. So we're using FOIA document requests. We've tried to subpoena Elon Musk in front of the House, but we were unable to get votes from Republicans. We're, demanding oversight. We're showing up physically at agencies and demanding entry. So those are some of the oversight tools. But at the end of the day, without regaining enough seats to stop them, we don't have the levers of using the tools of Congress more effectively. So we have to use the other tools we have, which is the bully pulpit, which is access to the media and town halls and educating the public so that they understand what is happening on the other side, and what people can do to feel empowered and to help address the moment. We're also working very closely, like I said, with the state attorney generals, as well as the nonprofit organizations that are bringing these lawsuits. Though Congress, we in the minority can't be a party to the lawsuits, we are writing amicus briefs to support these cases that give it an extra weight in front of the courts. But I mean, they're so blatantly breaking the law. There's not really a single judge that has been like, yeah, you're not actually breaking the law. Some of the cases have been structured in a way that judges responded like this maybe wasn't the right route to go, but they are very clearly breaking the law. So those are the ways in which we're fighting back. And for me, representing our communities, it's particularly important that we elevate the stories of the people who are being harmed and the impacts that these policies will have. And I think where I'll leave things with, and because I know a lot of people, these questions are on their minds. So last week there was a vote on keeping the government open for the remainder of this fiscal year. In the House, every single Democrat voted against that bill. We voted against it because it didn't put any guardrails on the Trump administration. We had pushed for weeks in budget negotiations to get language in there to clarify that they don't have the authority to freeze programs and to do all the bad things they're doing, and to protect programs that they would have cut under some of the proposals that they were putting through, including they cut the allocated funding for veterans healthcare for the PACT Act. And so House Democrats were a hell no on that bill. Unfortunately, when the bill went over to the Senate, because of the rules of the Senate, it would not have passed the Senate alone had a small handful of Democrats not voted for it. And that would have triggered a shutdown. Now, people are very angry about what happened. And I will tell you that there are people who are all over the map, and probably some of you are very angry about what happened. I personally think it was a tactically bad move to vote for the bill and not try to demand something. Because we have very limited tools to do that. And so that's why I voted against the bill. But at the end of the day, I do think that a shutdown would have been extraordinarily harmful to the American people, because there's no indication that Donald Trump would have reopened many of the agencies that would have shut down. And having worked at OMB, I was there during the 2013 shutdown. It's essentially the White House that orchestrates these shutdowns. And so, if they never wanted to reopen food assistance programs, if they never wanted to reopen Social Security, they could essentially do that under a shutdown order, because there'd be no requirement from Congress that they do that. So I think that it was a extraordinarily bad tactical move. to take that vote on some of the senators who took that vote. But I also think that the shutdown of the government would have been devastating for Americans. And that's the reality of this moment that we have to face. So we have to get ready for the next battle. And the next battle is the battle to save Medicaid, food assistance, housing programs, potentially Social Security, because the House Republicans are currently working on a massive tax package that would literally give permanent tax cuts to billionaires while cutting all of those vital programs. And the Republicans are trying to be very cute in their messaging about this. They're like, oh, the framework we passed didn't actually say that. Well, that's baloney. What happened is a couple of weeks ago, the House Republicans put together, it's called reconciliation, is using a budget maneuver essentially to pass a tax package. They put together basically instructions for a budget framework for reconciliation, and they put it in front of the House. The Republicans passed it. Not a single Democrat voted for it. And it basically says you're going to have to cut $600 million from this jurisdiction. Well, in that case, the only jurisdiction that falls under the committee that they gave those instructions is Medicaid. So they can say that's not what they're doing, but there's nowhere else to find that kind of money. So in addition to that, the Republicans also accidentally leaked their own document that showed all the programs that they're trying to cut. And it's a 50-page document, and Medicaid is pages and pages of that document. So we know that here in New Mexico, that would be devastating for our communities. They're talking about cutting individual Medicaid support. I think it's really important for folks to understand that whether or not you're a Medicaid recipient, it will affect the entire healthcare ecosystem of New Mexico, because every hospital in our state depends on Medicaid to operate. So if you think it's hard to get healthcare now, if they cut Medicaid, it is going to eviscerate the healthcare system in New Mexico. And so that is one of the reasons why we're so highly focused on that. Today, we also did a press conference with our food banks on the proposed cuts to SNAP, which is what folks commonly often know as food stamps. They want to cut $630 billion out of SNAP. 1 in 5 children in New Mexico have food insecurity, and about a fifth of New Mexicans are on SNAP benefits. If they cut SNAP, New Mexicans are going to be impacted. You're not going to be able to buy groceries, and the food bank is not going to be able to have enough funding to actually meet the need for hungry families in New Mexico. I know a lot of people are highly concerned about Social Security. It is not currently included in the framework that the Republicans passed in the House a few weeks ago. However, what gives me pause and keeps me up at night is that they have already, just this last week, through the hacking of the federal data system, the Elon Musk has been claiming there's all this fraud inside the system, which is just not true. Anyone who works at Social Security can tell you that like less than 1% of the folks in the database have been found to not be eligible for benefits. And those are tightly scrubbed databases. There were people in those systems that were not in active payment status, and they were not receiving money. But Musk has started to shut down payment to real people. We're fighting back in the courts. Our fear is that when reconciliation comes around, they're going to claim that they found all this fraud and that they are going to have savings by basically shutting down payment systems, as well as they're actively trying to shut down Social Security offices all over the country. And they also announced this week that they're going to require seniors to come in person to verify that they're a real person. Well, we know, especially if you're a person living with disabilities, or you're homebound, or you don't have access to transportation, like that burden is not acceptable. So we will also be fighting back in the courts on that as well. But at the end of the day, because I don't want people to leave this town hall and briefing feeling hopeless, is I want you all to know that like our power is in the power of the people. We have to keep showing up, across the country in Republican districts, showing up to town halls, calling Republican offices, sending letters to our Republican colleagues on my part and the rest of the delegation, talking to our colleagues who are serving in key critical roles. We have to continue to stop them in the courts. And we're going to have to continue to work towards this next election. And I know a lot of people are asking, will there even be another election? I am confident there will be another election, but I can tell you we're in for a rough couple of years. And I'm confident that Democrats will reclaim the House at some point in the next 2 years, but we have to keep fighting back using every possible tool that we have. So with that, I am going to just give everyone a moment. If you have questions, you have comments, please put them in the chat. And I'm going to take a pause for just a moment while you guys are thinking about what questions you have. And then I'll start answering questions. So go ahead and write your questions in the chat. Okay, so we have a couple of questions coming in here, and I'm gonna read them in real time and do my best to answer them. So let me kind of change this around here. So we have a question here from Sue, who is concerned about Social Security being the next victim of these budget cuts. What plans are there for Social Security cuts? I think hopefully I addressed that in my previous answer, but yeah, I mean, obviously, the Social Security exists because the Great Depression literally led to millions of Americans being hungry, and our seniors were the most vulnerable. And so it is there so that you pay into it. And at the end of your life, as you're, retiring, you get to cash out from your lifetime of work and have an income support. And we know that it's not only an entitlement because you paid into it, but it is the lifeline that keeps our seniors alive. And so I am shocked. If you had asked me 2 months ago if we thought that Republicans would really try to go after Social Security and start shutting down payments, I would have said, no, I don't think that that's politically feasible, but here they are doing it. And so this is where, the combination of going to the courts because they legally cannot stop payments on Social Security. That's not legal for them to do that. And also raising our voices collectively against Social Security cuts are really, really, really important. Okay. I am having trouble reading these questions. So we have a question here about why we have not been able to stop Trump. So kind of zooming back out, I think this is the question on everyone's mind is how do we stop him? If he's breaking the law and if Musk is breaking the law, how do we stop them? And the challenge right now is that within the constraints of the legal system, because the laws they're breaking are primarily federal laws and DOJ is not prosecuting them, they're not being held accountable. So that's why we're having to work with states, tribes, nonprofit organizations, and individuals and unions to bring those lawsuits. So the only way to stop them under the law right now is through the lawsuits. People ask me all the time, well, can't you just impeach him? No, impeachment is a vote that happens in Congress. We do not have enough votes to impeach Trump. It just is not something that's going to happen. So right now, within the constraints of the laws and the institutions, the most important front line are these lawsuits that are being brought by the states, tribes, and nonprofits. So that is how we stop Trump and Elon Musk, is by leveraging our partnerships with them. It's not that people are just talking and doing nothing. I can tell you we have a litigation task force in the House of Representatives that's led by Jamie Raskin, who's probably the top constitutional scholar serving in the United States government. And we are turning over every possible stone to look at legal avenues to hold them accountable and stop them. But right now, the court cases that are coming from the states and the nonprofits are the ways in which we're stopping them. Now, there is a bigger question, like if these cases go to the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court rules in favor of the lower courts and Trump is still not complying, then what? And I don't think any of us have that answer, because there's not been a point in history where that's ever happened before. The other side of that is that just a couple of days ago, you may have seen that John Roberts, who is a conservative justice in the Supreme Court, essentially pushed back as Trump has been attacking judges and calling for their impeachment. And folks outside the legal community may not have really paid attention to John Roberts' comments, but they were extremely significant, because he's basically the swing vote on the Supreme Court. And what he was saying by the comments that he made pushing back against Trump was saying, no, dude, you bring those cases come in front of me, I am not going to vote against the Constitution. And so I think that should give people a little bit of comfort to know that even the conservative justices, including Amy Coney Barrett, has also ruled against Trump in a couple of these cases already, are like, yeah, this is too far. You're breaking the law. There is another question here about bringing back folks who were deported to El Salvador. There are several court cases pending in the courts right now. I am not an expert on this particular set of issues, but Donald Trump used a set of authorities, including a wartime authority, to deport individuals. They broke the law. So there's a number of court cases that are being worked on to hold them accountable and to deal with the aftermath of that. So I don't have specifics, but we can follow up on that. The next question is about, is there a valid basis as to why the United States just denied Colorado water delivery to Tijuana, Mexico? I had not heard that, so thank you for bringing that forward. That's something I'm going to have to go look into, but thank you for bringing that to this space. What I can tell you is that we have a number of international treaties and compacts with Mexico that require that we deliver water. And so I can't answer this specific question because I haven't read up on it today. The next question says, thank you, I'm a grant writer. Clients had their federal grants terminated, can't access funds. Congress has already appropriated the funds. What can be done? So I'm kind of summarizing. So yes, if you are a federal contractor or a grantee of the federal government, and you were already under contract or had already received notice that you were getting grant funding from the federal government, contact our office if you have not received the funds or your funds are frozen. There are multiple court cases, court orders that have said that those funding freezes are illegal. And we have had some luck in getting those grants unfrozen, working with the legal partners who have those cases. So there's kind of three avenues. One is contact our office and we'll help put you in touch with the lawyers who are handling those cases. Democracy Forward is the primary nonprofit that is acting as a sort of nonprofit legal counsel to address all these issues, and they can assist and also work with the court on compliance because they're one of the leads on one of these cases. And you can contact our Attorney General here in New Mexico, Raul Torres. You can just contact his office directly because New Mexico is a party to the lawsuit that the states filed under the funding freezes. And so any entity in New Mexico that has been harmed by the funding freezes falls under the jurisdiction of New Mexico's harm under those lawsuits. So contact our office, contact the AG, and contact Democracy Forward. We have a question here about what is the very latest with Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. I think we covered this, but just to kind of summarize it, at the present moment, Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid are, I don't want to say untouched because that's not the case, but they are in place. The real risk is with Social Security, the way in which they're hacking these payment systems and shutting down offices and now requiring people to come in person. And there's a risk, like I said, that they may try to take what they're calling fraud or savings that they get from that and try to put it back into those tax breaks that they give to billionaires. So, like I said, there's multiple court cases about all these issues, and there was a court order yesterday about accessing the Social Security data system. Medicare and Medicaid are still in place. One of the challenges, I think, is that many of the federal employees that were fired under the mass firing that happened a couple of weeks ago were actually like claims folks. And so we know that there's already been a huge hit to the federal workforce of people who work at Social Security on their hotlines, people who work at Medicaid and Medicare. And so we already know that people are being impacted. So if you're calling, trying to find out the status of a claim or, disability, it's already impacting people. So we're using the tools that we can to fight back in the courts, and we need to raise our voices to make sure that they don't put it in statute. Let's see. Someone's asking about the name of the women's group that helped me run. We're in a nonpartisan official space here, but what I'll say is that there's lots of organizations across the state and country that help people run for office, including Emily's List and Emerge, as well as other candidate training programs that people are interested in running for office. So encourage folks to look into those. Someone says, thank you for what you're doing. This is not normal. We're in a blue state. What can we do to help? I get this question a lot. New Mexico, we're very fortunate here, and we're fortunate on so many fronts right now because not only do we have a congressional delegation that's very united in pushing back against the harmful things that the administration is doing, but we have a governor and a state legislature that are also trying to protect our communities. So tomorrow is the last day of the state legislature. There's a number of bills and budget initiatives that were baked into state law this session that were designed to try to protect New Mexicans from, for example, cuts to Medicaid and cuts to food assistance programs and other things like that. So what are the things you can do politically, and what are the things you can do at home? Politically speaking, we need our Republican colleagues to remember why they ran for office and who they represent. You can call congressional offices. As a standard practice, all congressional offices ask what your zip code is and if you're a constituent, but that doesn't mean you can't call them. It's very important that especially Republican leaders, people in leadership in the House and Senate, committee chairs hear from Americans how they feel about what's going on right now. So I really, really encourage folks who feel motivated to have their voices heard to call and to write letters to Republican members of Congress, especially in leadership. But I also think it's really important for us to be leaders in our own communities. And, at the end of the day, what is the serenity prayer, to have the wisdom to, work on the things that you can. I mean, we all can only do our own small part in our communities. And, especially if you're somebody who is of limited means or you have mobility challenges, you may feel like this is also overwhelming. I don't know what I can do to help. But all of us have circles and networks that we're a part of, whether it's family members, a book group, a listserv that we send information to. All of us have the capacity to share information. All of us have the capacity to help people around us. And so I am encouraging people to engage in what I call everyday acts of resistance. If you're a teacher, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to keep teaching the history that is American history. If you're working with kids who are children of immigrant families who have mixed immigration status, reach out to those kids. Their families are struggling right now. They're afraid. You know, members of our trans community are under attack like never before in history. If you have family members and friends who are trans, reach out to them, and members of the LGBTQ plus community. Um, invest in and support local nonprofits like the ACLU and others that are fighting these fights and these battles locally for our communities. Sign up to volunteer at the food bank. There are so many ways that you can step up right now to help the community, and that's what we need. Even if you can't control anything in the political world, or don't feel like that's a space you want to work in, you can do things to help our community. So think about the ways that you can be empowered to do something locally. And if you do want to run for office, run for office. We need people to step up and run for office as well. Okay. Next question is, I'm an educator married to a kiddo who's starting kindergarten. What the hell are we going to do? What are we going to do to save our school systems? Yes, this is a very important question right now, especially as they're dismantling Department of Education. So here's what we know about the Trump administration's plans for education. They, under the first Trump administration, they tinkered around the edges in trying to make school choice or vouchers the primary means for how public education would be funded. And what we see them doing now is basically dismantling any program that is not like basic funding that goes to the states that they can try to turn over to a voucher program, and the student loan programs, because they know if they touch that, people are going to go crazy. So, and they're also claiming that they're not touching programs that affect students with disabilities, but that's just untrue, because already across the country, we've seen funding get frozen. We believe what their plans are, because we've already seen this with tribal education. They're trying to move some of the tribal funding programs from Department of Education over to Bureau of Indian Education, which sits under Department of Interior. And they did a consultation last week with tribes and told them that they plan to turn tribal schools into voucher programs, which would be catastrophic for tribal education, because one, there isn't school choice in many rural tribal communities, and two, because it's a federal trust and treaty responsibility. This is why, again, the courts are so vital. Everything they're doing with education programs are illegal at the present moment, but it doesn't seem to be stopping them. So, I think there's the importance in this moment is to think about things in the short term and think about things in the long term. In the short term, based on the plans that we see them putting into motion, it seems like the schools are going to continue to be funded through the states, and they're going to send, the funding through the states as they have, and that they're going to try more and more and more to try to force the states to adopt controversial voucher programs, which would defund public schools. There's nothing wrong with charter schools. The issue comes into when you take funding away on a per student basis from public schools and you defund public schools. And that's really what their end goal is. And that's when you hear school choice, that's actually what they're talking about, is defunding public schools. And what we know is public schools, I'm a public school kid. I went to APS K through 12, are the pathway to survival and leadership. And so we're going to be fighting that back in the courts every step of the way. But in the short term, I think the biggest impacts to schools are that a lot of our teachers are feeling really frightened right now. They're worried that they're going to lose grant programs. They're worried about how they're going to meet the needs of our students who have learning challenges. And a lot of these grant programs are frozen because of the DEI initiative. So all of that is something that we're fighting in the courts. So that's the short-term piece. The long-term piece is like, how do we reverse all of this? And I think, you know, in many ways, we're in the middle of a chaotic battle. And so what it'll all look like when the dust settles and what we rebuild and how we rebuild it is something we're going to have to be very thoughtful about. But right now, our focus, just due to the emergency nature of what's happening right now, is fighting and stopping it in the courts. I have another question about what can individuals do. I think I just covered that one. There's a question here about the dismantling of education and how it's going to impact children and how we fight back. I think I covered that one. I think this is what I think, having watched Trump, I think I told you as I was telling you more about my background and story. I was in Washington, D.C. when Trump was elected, and I was there for the first 9 months. And I think his modus operandus is that he makes promises that he knows are outrageous, then he does an action to try to show that he tried it, and then when he gets reined in by the courts or by the people, he says, oh, I tried to do it, but I got stopped by the liberal media or whoever it is, right? And I think I think they're serious about dismantling the Department of Education, but they also don't have the legal authority to do it. So they're doing it administratively, but at the end of the day, like, I don't see any scenario where the Supreme Court rules that it is legal for Donald Trump to dismantle the Department of Education. It is a statutory entity with legal requirements. So while they may be serious about doing it administratively, they're breaking the law. Let's see here. There's a question here about an order signed yesterday about the suitability and fitness of the federal workforce. Oh my goodness, I haven't actually, there's so much news every single day that we were on the road up in the East Mountains yesterday, so I have not seen that executive order. So I'm sorry that I can't answer this specific question, but as soon as we get off this call, I'll certainly acquaint myself with whatever he signed. What I can tell you is that overall, it's very clear that this administration, and they're not trying to hide it. This is very much their agenda. They are trying to dismantle the federal workforce. And the kind of sergeants who Trump has enabled to do this are Elon Musk, who's using a technology approach using OPM's tools, and Russell Vought, who's the head of OMB right now. And this gentleman who did go through Senate confirmation lied through his teeth through his confirmation, but he literally wrote Project 2025 and was the architect who helped to envision what Project 2025 would be. And the attorney who works with him is one of the people who's kind of behind all the legal theories that they're trying to argue they have the authority to do this. But Russell Vought is, openly said that they want to get rid of the majority of the federal workforce and make their lives miserable. And, I, like probably many of you, have a lot of friends who work for the federal government. And the way that it has been described to me is a culture of fear inside of every federal agency right now, that every federal worker, no matter what agency you work for, doesn't know if they're going to wake up and find out they're fired. Their assignments have been removed, their supervisors aren't talking to them. But what is even more outrageous to me is that even the cabinet secretaries and their political appointees are not being looped in. So, for example, we had some tribes come visit me last week who had gone to the tribal consultation on the budget process, and the normal political appointees and others who would have been there either weren't there or couldn't answer questions because there was no guidance from the Secretary of Interior about what was going on with tribal programs. So I think it's just important to emphasize how unprecedented this moment is, even inside the administration. And by the way, the cabinet secretaries themselves are really pissed off about what's happening, but they also are afraid to speak out. But again, all of this is illegal. So if you are a federal worker, or you know a federal worker that got fired and you need help, contact our office. We can put you in touch with Democracy Forward and the unions who are helping to spearhead those cases, who can provide more specific information about your particular case and employment. There's another question here about why can't we remove Trump? The only way to remove Trump is through impeachment, per our Constitution. Somebody asked an interesting question the other day about, like, if Musk as a private citizen is breaking the law at a state level, could he be held accountable under state law? These are all interesting questions, and also kind of go to the heart of, I'm not a lawyer, I don't even try to play one on TV, but there are protections for federal workers around what's called sovereign immunity and what they do in the course of their employment. But these guys are clearly breaking the law. But I'm not a smart enough person or lawyer to know if there's other means by how to do this. But this actually goes to a question about what can you do. There's a lot of people asking, what can I do? If you're a member of the legal community and you want to get involved, organizations like Democracy Forward and our ACLUs and others are trying to recruit help, because there's so many thousands of cases, not just the big cases, these class actions and group cases, but individual cases of like federal workers who need legal advice. And so that's a way, if you're a member of the legal community, you can get involved and help. We have another question here about Social Security. I think we've covered that one. So I'm going to move on to the next question here. Are there legal actions being undertaken to stop the dismantling of Department of Education? Yes. And in fact, before the EO was signed yesterday, there was a court case, like I said, that had been found, I think it was last Friday, that the firing of the last tranche of Department of Ed employees was illegal. So yes, absolutely. The next question is concern about the widespread firing of federal workers in New Mexico. How can we push back as individuals? Yes, so again, maybe I'll just use this opportunity to talk about the impacts to New Mexicans specifically. New Mexico, depending on what numbers you look at, we have one of the highest proportion of our workforce in general is federal employees and military members of the military. And that's because everything from our national labs to the Air Force bases to, we have actually several regional centers in New Mexico, including we have a Social Security office here in New Mexico. Forest Service has a major regional office here. So we have a large, BIA is also a Bureau of Indian Education, and the trustees are also based out of Albuquerque. So we have a huge portion of our workforce in the state are federal workers. I think, as hopefully has been clear through the conversation here, many of the firings that have happened are not legal, and Trump has been ordered by the courts to reoffer people their jobs, especially those who were fired through the probationary firing. So what we can do, my office, again, is if you've been impacted, contact my office and we'll put you in touch with the unions and with the law organizations who are taking these suits. But for those of you out there that are wondering how you can help, a lot of people who either took the fork in the road retirement or who got fired during one of these firings, whether it's the DEI firings or the probationary firings, they're in crisis right now. some of the people who got fired were actually HR people. And so people have not been able to get a hold of even basic HR staff in the agencies to find out when they're going to get their paycheck and what's going to happen to their healthcare benefits. So the governor has been holding job fairs and support fairs around the state, and the congressional offices have been helping out with that. My office, we're hoping in our next district work period to pull together a big job fair, and we're hoping to do it here in Albuquerque. And so if you're an employer who has jobs to offer, please contact our office. We'd love to get you involved. And if you know anyone who's been impacted, you can send them our way. Someone asked if I would join Bernie Sanders in his town hall. Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I know Bernie Sanders and AOC are currently doing town halls in Republican districts. And they have several that they're doing out west. I think they have one planned in Colorado this week, and I'm not sure if it's passed already. And I think they did one in Texas and one in Arizona. Here in New Mexico, we have an all Democratic congressional delegation. So we're here, we're doing the town halls. But certainly if our Republican colleagues are not going to hold town halls for their own constituents, we're happy to do so. What can be done to stop the administration from ignoring the rule of law? I think this is the ultimate question that everyone is asking. Yeah, I mean, it's, if they defy the Supreme Court, what then? And, I think one of my colleagues said you can't be in politics and not be wired for optimism. And so even though I wake up with dread every day, I am optimistic that the American people will prevail, and that it is so much a part of our culture as Americans to not allow abuse of power, that, whether it's standing up at town halls, marching in the streets, and fighting back in the courts, and showing up in mass for the next election cycle, we will stop them. I'm very confident that we will. And when you look at what happened in 2016, that was the year Trump was elected. 2018, tens of thousands of people ran for office who've never run for office before, including myself. I think we're going to see a wave of new people coming into office and retaking many of these House seats that we've never seen before. And that's why political action is really, really vital right now. So, yeah. Let's see. Someone asked, what is the overall temperature in this of Senate and House Democrats in terms of infighting, difficulties, rallying, planning, unifying? The comment says it looks disjointed from the outside. Yeah, it does look disjointed from the outside, doesn't it? I was somebody called me yesterday to ask about running for office, and he asked me, what is the Democratic Party, what are they looking for candidates? And it was such an interesting way to pose the question to me, because the Democratic Party, I think a lot of people have a vision of it, that it's a thing that exists somewhere, and it sort of like orchestrates this whole activity that includes all of the elected representatives. But it's actually quite the inverse. The Democratic Party overall is a grassroots organization that's made up of precinct chairs and ward chairs at the most local level, like neighborhood level. And then it scales up all the way to the national level. And our Democratic parties are all elected at the grassroots level. And in fact, in New Mexico, in Bernalillo County, we have our elections for our most local state committee and precinct chairs and stuff in the next few weeks. That's the party. The party is a huge grassroots enterprise with thousands of people all over the country that are a part of it and helping shape it. But within the party, of course, there are voices that have sort of outsized impact because they're in leadership positions. So in the Senate, of course, you've got the leadership team, and in the House, you have the leadership team, and they help to shape the message, they help to shape how everyone shows up, and to coordinate on strategy. What I can tell you is that in the House, it is a very coordinated strategy. Our leadership in the House, led by Hakeem Jeffries, has been highly effective, I think, in whipping votes when they matter and giving members discretion when it's important politically for them. And I think one of the things that's really important to understand is that to retake the House, we have to win Trump districts. And so while it might make sense, especially if you are like so passionate about this is how we should look as a unified entity fighting on all issues, that sometimes as a strategy doesn't give space to people that are going to have to win in Trump districts. So it might not be right for them to take some votes, or it might not be right for them and their constituents for them to be, on the floor pounding away saying, I hate this. So I was describing it the other day to somebody that, like, in many ways, like, if you zoom out, the Democratic Party you see a picture, but if you zoom in, it's like those paintings that are like pointillist, and like every little point is a different elected official who has a different constituency, a different group of people that they represent, and has to be accountable to their own constituents. And I think that the House leadership has been effective in trying to rally around the necessity of both showing we're fighting and giving space to members that have to win in difficult districts. Now, I think that it was very chaotic, and I think all of us understand that the way in which some of the public response, for example, around the State of the Union was not pretty. I mean, all you have to do is read a newspaper to know that. And people had very different points of view about what fighting back looks like. And I think there are still significant disagreements. There's probably, how many ever hundreds of people are on this call, you probably all have different opinions about what fighting back looks like. And that is also true inside of the Democratic Party. And so part of what leadership does is try to listen and bring everyone together. In terms of the Senate, I don't sit in the Senate. The Senate does operate very separately from the House. And so the discussions that led to the Senate vote last week, I wasn't in the room and any of those happened. But I can tell you that the House Democrats were very unified in trying to persuade the Senate to stand with the American people. And we had a caucus meeting yesterday, and our leadership told us that they met with Schumer over the weekend, and difficult conversations were had, and that they believe that we're on track to show a more unified front going forward. So that's what I can leave you with in that area. We have a question here about USAID and whether or not a retirement would be honored. Regarding your specific question here, please just contact my office. I think Rebecca's actually already put you in touch with us, but yeah, if you were laid off through one of these mass firings, especially USAID, there was a court case just a few days ago that was illegal. So there is legal remedy, but I don't know the details of your specific retirement case. Somebody says we don't have time to wait for elections. Absolutely, I agree. And that's why, fighting back in the courts and persuading members of Congress, what we need is Republicans like Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, who were not afraid to stand up to Donald Trump, to just start speaking up. And my hope is that, whether they're retiring or just people who have the backbone to do it, that some of those Republicans will start to stand up in the coming months. There's questions about the court rulings. I think we've covered that. The Postal Service. Postal Service is so important to New Mexico. What are you doing to get rid of the current postmaster and prevent privatization? So interestingly, the guy who is currently DeJoy, who serves in the post office, was a Donald Trump appointee, and apparently Donald Trump doesn't like him either. So he's planning to take him out. But unfortunately, Donald Trump's agenda has remained unchanged around privatization, not just of the Postal Service, but many of these programs. Again, the Postal Service is a federally authorized and funded program. Again, short term, we'll have to go to the courts to stop them. Long term, how do we restructure and recover if they continue to try to do it administratively? We're going to have to figure that out. So yeah. There's a question here about Democrats being in the minority. How are we using our power to slow down the Trump administration? A disappointment in Schumer. Yes, I mean, I agree wholeheartedly. The House and the Senate operate, like, our day-to-day operations are really different. I'm a former Senate staffer, and I was actually really surprised when I started working in the House as a representative, how different the House and Senate is. In the Senate, the senators have more power in some ways than individual House members. One, because there's only 100 in the body overall, so each senator's vote has a lot more weight. But also because of what's called the filibuster, or cloture is the formal term. There's in the Senate, before any bill can be voted on, you have to get 60 votes to shut down debate. And they call that the filibuster vote by colloquial. And that's what Schumer and others voted for. They voted to end debate to allow a vote on the bill itself. There's all kinds of ways to twist ourselves up in the pretzel, because I believe we should get rid of the filibuster and just have majority vote anyways. But this was an opportunity for the Senate, the Democratic senators, to use the filibuster to stop bad things from happening. And I think they should have. But Schumer went out on his own, and he seems to believe that he did the right thing. That will be up to the senators in the Senate to decide whether or not he will continue to be their leadership, because it's the senators who vote on him representing them. In the House, we don't have the filibuster in the House. Basically, when a bill is being teed up to be voted on, it goes to the Rules Committee, and Teresa Ledger Fernandez, our Congresswoman, she serves in the Rules Committee. But the way the House is structured, minority, majority, there's like the disproportionality on the Rules Committee is wild. There's like 4 Democratic members and 8, 10 Republican members. And that's where kind of the shape of bills and the debate gets formed. So we have very little power in the House to control what's happening. And also because there's 435 of us. So I know people are like, you need to do everything you can to slow it down, but we don't have the votes or power. What we are doing is that we are, showing up in our committee hearings and fighting back and using procedural tactics. We're introducing subpoenas, we're introducing amendments. But in some ways, that at the end of the day, if you don't have the votes, you don't have the votes. So we can cause a hearing to go all day, but we're still going to lose because we're in the minority. And so there's a balance, I think, right now between resisting productively and preserving our energy and our time to also do the things that we know we have to do to stop them immediately and plan for the next steps. So that's how I would approach that. I know we're at the end of our time here. We've got about 5 more minutes. And so I'm kind of scanning. I know there's a lot of questions about Social Security and Medicaid. Hopefully we've covered a lot of that. Let's see, there's a question about the Republican Party having abandoned people. I mean, I agree wholeheartedly. It's sad to watch, to be honest. I have a lot of colleagues in the House who I'm friends with and who I respect actually quite a lot, who are Republicans, and they very much disagree with what's happening, but they do not feel empowered to speak out. So it's really awful. There's a question here about inspector generals. It's another one of these court cases. You know, if their real intent was rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse, they wouldn't have fired the officials that investigate it. That seems pretty straightforward. We think they fired the inspector generals because actually, in a number of cases, they were conducting investigations of Elon Musk because he was doing things that were illegal and violating his federal contracts. And let me see here. Oh my gosh, there's so many more questions. Let me scan these really quick. There's a question about SBA. SBA was one of the original agencies that the probationary firings happened at. We know that they're actively going after the Minority Business Administration because it was in a Trump executive order last week. But I would anticipate the SBA will be on their radar. But again, we're just going to have to continue to push back. There's questions about free and fair elections, how we address the mindset of what's happening, about grassroots boycotts, how can we organize on the ground, bipartisan attempts to stop, how do we get rid of Musk, citizenship questions, and also some questions about foreign service officers. So let me try to catch these things as much as possible in kind of my concluding statements. We haven't touched a lot today on immigration, but obviously this is an area where Trump has leaned in. It was the platform he ran on. And the way I would characterize what they're doing is that they're trying to terrorize immigrants. You know, there are millions of Americans who live in this country who either do not have legal status, have some kind of legal status, are married to somebody with legal status, are the parents of somebody who have legal status, who became citizens, who have a resident status. And the way in which the Trump administration is going about immigration enforcement, I believe, is with the intent to try to deter immigration by scaring people. And you can see this evidenced in the ICE roundups that they're doing, where they're detaining people who have like resident status and people who are here legally, the way they've shut down the asylum system, which is legal, the way in which, you know, their lead guy, Homan, who wrote Project 2025, is on Fox News every day, and the way they're using Department of Justice to try to terrorize states and cities that are not complying with their orders. So all of that, illegal. It's illegal. We're in the courts fighting it on many, many fronts. And this is where, you know, there's things within our power and there's things not within our power. And I think that, you know, if you know families that are immigrants, please support them right now. People are actually really, really scared, and help immigrant rights organizations. One of the funding cuts that's still frozen is they cut funding to Lutheran Family Services and several of our refugee and immigration organizations. And so they need support right now, volunteers as well as support from the community. So if that's an issue that you care about, and or if you're an immigrant and you need help, you can contact our office and we'll do our best to help out with that. I also saw some questions about specific federal employee questions. Again, call my office. If we can't help you with this specific question, we'll put you in touch with the unions or with the nonprofits who are working on cases who can give more specific legal help. In terms of bipartisan work to stop any of this, I think, you know, not to beat a dead horse, but right now, you know, we're only 3 months into this administration, and I have seen no outward visible sign that the Republicans in Congress are willing to use formal tools and legislation to stop Trump because they're scared of him. So there's no bipartisan action happening to put guardrails up. And that's why we're saying keep up the pressure. And then I think that comes back to the grassroots. I know people are like, this is a 5-alarm situation. What can we do? And that's why, you know, we are a democracy. Your voice matters. Keep raising your voice, keep showing up to protest, keep calling congressional offices, keep informing your friends and family, especially inform your friends and family who themselves may have voted in this way, but now we're like, wait, what's going on? The only way we're going to save our democracy is by getting involved. And so I just want to say thank you to all of you for tuning in today. Thank you for listening. I'm sorry that I can't answer any and all of these questions, but please know that my office is here as a resource, and know that we're in the fight in the trenches with you, and that you know, all of us have a voice and a role to play in saving our country and supporting our communities. And so I hope that the thought that you leave here with is not just a sense of hopelessness and fear and frustration about what's going on, but a sense of empowerment and a sense that there are things that you can do in your life to help the people that you love and to help contribute and raise your voice to save our country. So with that, I hope you have a very happy Friday. Please contact our office, and I'm sending you guys so much love. Get some rest, be resilient, and we'll be back for the fight. All right, thanks everyone.